Welcome to the Centaur Podcast. I'm Cameron Adibi, and together we will explore the fascinating world of horse-human communication and the extraordinary connections they develop between our species. Join me as we delve into the unique ways humans and horses connect and understand each other. Through discussions with true innovators, we uncover the subtle cues, bonding techniques, and emotional connections that enrich our relationships with these remarkable animals. Whether you are a seasoned equestrian or simply curious about the language of horses, there's something here for everyone. I'm thrilled to have two remarkable guests, Marianne Simonds, an esteemed equine behavioral ecologist, and Barbara Wheeler, a talented wild horse photographer. I've had them both on the show individually, but this is the first time I've had them both speaking and discussing some of Barbara's beautiful photographs and talking about some of the myths about wild herds, more of the overview, and really looking at how functional and dysfunctional herds operate. It's such an interesting topic. If you have any interest in herd dynamics, please listen to this. This is going to be a very good show. Sit back and enjoy the show. Marianne and Barbara, thank you so much. This is actually I'm saying this is a historic moment. I have Barbara, you're a wild horse photographer. Marianne, you are an equine behavioral ecologist. And so the two of you together have this really interesting lens, and you've been working together. Got the very well-used book. Thank you, Marianne, and Barbara's photos.
Oh, that is very well used. Good job, Cameron.
See, I'm gonna
it's
have
even
to buy
more well used than mine.
I'm going to have to buy another copy, Marianne. So, and Barbara. So,
it's on heavy paper too.
Yeah, so
it
this
is
A Horse by Nature. Marianne, you wrote the text. Barbara, you have a lot of your photos in here. So how did you guys two meet? What happened?
Well, I was doing a presentation at a horse event in the Pacific Northwest, and I walked by this booth that had these beautiful wild horse photographs. And I noticed one, which we'll show in a little bit. And I thought, oh my gosh, who is this photographer? How did she capture it? Because I knew instantly what it was. And so she sought it out, and I said, that I thought it was what it was. And she looked at me and said, I'm purposely not saying what it is, because if we show it, I want everybody to kind of guess, but because I've always used it in the lectures to say, what's going on here? And she looked at me and goes, you're the first person that actually knew that are interested in it. And we just hit it off, because she had captured so many behaviors, these subtle behaviors that you miss if you aren't a good eye, a good listener. And I had observed those things in the field, but I hadn't seen a photograph, and she had beautiful photographs. So that was my story.
Thank you, Marianne.
And
so you are the only person that has correctly identified that photo. And I think we met in something like 2008. Yes. 2007, 2008. It's been a long time. No one has ever, other than you, has ever correctly identified that photo.
And that's let's show that photo, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to show that photo? It's
All
a
right.
good way to start it out.
Let's look at this photo. So I'm going to share my screen. And
this photo is special. And it's special in a lot of ways, because it shows so much of how horses learn and the cognitive expression of the horse. And that can be translated. Not that one, the big one that Barbara sent.
The big one.
Not this one. No. The threesome.
Oh, the threesome. Yes. Okay.
The two stallion. Yeah. Oops. Yes. Yes, that one.
Okay. All right. Let's zoom in and try to zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, blow that one up. That one's great, because I really want to talk about why it's so special. Okay. So when I saw this photo, I was pretty giddy and excited, because the horses were doing exactly what it's so important to teach people with the domestic horses to do. If you look their eyes are all connected to each other. They are concentrating and aware of each other. Their behavior is being mimicked. And if you look, the stallion in the front, his ears are a little bit back. The little colt is mimicking his dad, putting his ears back a little bit. And the stallion behind, which is probably an uncle, is keeping an eye on the youngster. And this was so typical of stallions teaching youngsters how to go on patrol. And you can just see it in the behavior, the body language, the eye contact, the movement of saying to the young colt, hey, we're not your mom. Pay attention. Do not go in front of us. We're the ones going out on guard. And that translates so well when we look at how we relate to horses, is that if whoever's eye is in front, that's the animal that's making most of the decisions. And so that mimicking behavior, the eye contact, and connection and awareness, and all of them in a complete communication learning state, I just thought was absolutely spectacular.
It's incredible photo. And this is from the book. It's in the book, correct, Marianne?
Yes, it is.
So Barbara,
Mhm.
now can you tell us where the more of the background from where this herd is?
This was in an area in Nevada where the horses were really very used to people being around. In fact, they were right next to a highway, to a major highway. And we stopped because we saw horses. They obviously very used to people, so they didn't pay very much attention to us. And the benefit of that is that they just do their normal behavior. Yeah, if they're not used to people, they don't they don't do things like this necessarily. So they grazed for a while, and then I think they were just deciding to move off. And the stallion, who I agree, I mean, I don't think there's any way to know for sure for me, but I think looking at the posture of these horses, I would say that the lead horse was probably the band stallion, decided to leave. The mares were behind them, walking in a leisurely manner. They were not hurrying, they weren't afraid, they were just going somewhere else. So what's unusual to me about this is that normally you would see that foal with a mare. You wouldn't necessarily see them walking with two stallions like this. And I don't know that I have seen this particular situation again where the whole band is leaving and the foal is with the stallions. So it's still really a pretty unique photo for me.
Well, and I think
So they meandered off, and that was that. And I don't think I had any idea what I had until Marianne said that's something different.
and I had
I just didn't know.
and that's
What's
why
that?
I said, and I had seen that behavior before. And that's why it was so special, because so much of perception of wild horses is that, they're mares. I mean, when I started my wild horse research in Wyoming, it was my undergraduate at the University of Wyoming. I did it in range management and wildlife conservation and management. So I picked wild horses as my species. And when I started, the predominant belief system was that stallions, there were harems of mares with a stallion, and mares and babies, the stallion took care of them. So I went out in the field with that kind of perception expectation, and it was not right at all. And that's where learning to listen and see through the eyes of a child that doesn't know anything was much better. So what I saw was things like this: two stallions teaching a colt, going, those are two stallions with that colt. Where's the mom? And the mom might be off grazing with her girlfriends, and then you might have a 2-year-old babysitting with all the youngsters around. And, one of my first experiences was a mare. I don't know if that's in the pictures or not, but I know it's in the book, but it was a mare that the I was doing some work on the Red Desert herd, and the BLM at the time, this is back in the 70s, so it was a long time ago, wanted me to identify a band that was on some ranchers' lands in a water trough. And they kept telling me about this bay stallion, and he was this. And so I'm only, 18, and I'm pretty naive in Wyoming. And so I see the bay horse that they were telling me about, but it didn't look like a stallion to me, but it was presenting itself up front. And so on that weekend, I had the district manager and the range con come out with me, and they kind of looked at me like, oh, this girl from California, she doesn't know anything. They had a spotting scope and they're like, oh, there he is. Like, what's wrong with you? And I look at this bay horse and I said to them, that's, if that's the stallion you're talking about, what do you think the foal has been sucking on all week? Because that was a mare. And they just kind of went,
I always laugh at that story every time I hear it.
oh, and it was just perception. They're like, what? And I said, the stallion was a little chestnut in the back herding the mares. And that was a big bay mare, not unlike the one that, that's in the book that you have that just came up front. And I found that behavior was not, I mean, it was unique to that group, but it wasn't that odd, that mare. And oftentimes the mares would push their foals into the center of a group when they felt threatened. And sometimes the mares became very protective. It wasn't always stallion dominated and the mares all ran off with their foals. There was a lot of different behavior. And so it intrigued me that the behavior of the red desert horses were different than the Green Mountain horses, that were different than McCullough Peak horses, that were different from, the Green River horses, and Colorado horses. So coming in as a behavioral wildlife ecologist and looking at the philosophy that the habitat was altering behavior, yes, to some degree, that's true, but it was not at all something conclusive. It was horses were learning and thinking different ways to behave, and they were adapting according to their social skills and how they would be put together. So yeah, so it was fascinating.
Well, and I want to clarify that this isn't this. When I said this was the only time I had ever seen this particular scenario, I've seen so many stallions walking with foals that I can't count them.
Oh, okay.
It happens all the time. What I meant was, how generally, Marianne will know this, generally when the herd moves off, lots of times it's the lead mare. She's the one in the lead. This particular situation, the stallion was in the lead, walking with probably, I assume, who knows? That could be a 2-year-old, 3-year-old still in the band. It could be a lieutenant. Don't know. But anyway, another stallion and the foal in the lead. That's what made it unusual. Usually the foals are back with the mares.
Well,
when they're moving off.
All right. So I got here's the question, because you guys are really, I mean, we still have a lot to learn is what that's with
some people have lots to learn.
Well, I mean, and the general population about how the behavior of all these horses. But you told me this last time, Barbara, that and Marianne, you confirmed this, that the stallions babysit the foals.
They
nice.
do often.
I think that's awesome, but a very not really necessarily, I don't know, my opinion, known. That's not really well understood.
Well, and there's a whole lot of behaviors, and I think walking through what's a horse's life like, and I think that's why Barbara and I did a horse by nature. Is we talked a lot for years about doing like a log, like a field journal, so it would combine her photos with my field notes, and then years would go by and we progressed, and finally it was like, okay. I need a tip book for horse people who are serious. And so, doing the whole first section of A Horse by Nature on wild horse behavior and sensing and communication just made sense. And, Barbara, you'll enjoy this, but a comment came in from a client who forwarded it to me. And she commented and said, she was thanking the person that had done a book review. And I thought that was really sweet. And she said, thank you so much. It's been a game changer. And she went on to say, not only has it helped with my high performance horses, but I have Mustangs, and it completely bridged the whole.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And I thought, oh my God, she gets it.
Gosh, yes.
Because in our head that the horse out on the range is different than the horse in the stall. And while it may have a different experience and education, it is the same creature. And that's where Dr. Dan Rubenstein, writing from Princeton's perspective and all of his equid work, the opening to the first section, it's more like a National Geographic of saying, listen, I don't know how other people's field experiences were, but these are mine, and they correlate pretty well with a lot of other field biologists of equid behavior around the planet at that time. And he's found the same thing with zebras, that zebra mares and babies have social facilitators. which was something that I was able to identify, that just what you just said. It wasn't the stallion that oftentimes went off and made decisions. In fact, rarely.
That's right. Most of the times it wasn't the stallion.
No, the stallions are aware and on guard for other stallions, but they really aren't particularly
Right.
good at protecting and sensing, which is, sad for mares in captivity because they don't get rewarded for their high sensitivity and alertness. Instead, they get reprimanded like, oh, my horse is so spooky. Well, she's trying to take care of you so you don't get eaten. And so they are the ones that are saying, okay, it's time to go to water. My foal is thirsty, or they're the ones initiating. And the stallions kind of follow along when the mares decide to go because it's very foal centric in terms of energy conservation, to give a term.
And that's actually a great lead into another photo.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
So, yep,
Okay. All right.
yep. Okay, so what Marianne was talking about, that's very much what happened in the situation. This was a very wild herd. They were not used to people. And it was also a very large band. So the stallion had probably a dozen mares and foals. So he had his hands full. All he wanted to do when we showed up was leave. And he was desperate to leave. But as you can tell by this photo, and this is the lead mare.
Sorry, go back. Good news. I'm going to just edit. You know what I'm going to do is then post edit.
It's after it. It's after it.
Go the other way.
After it.
Go down.
Right. There you go.
There you go.
This one. Okay.
All right. All right.
So she did not want to leave. She's the lead mare. She did not want to leave. She wanted to know all about us. And he ran them around in circles and she refused to leave. So we got a ton of photos, wonderful photos of this band, mainly because this lead mare was not about to leave. Wow. So finally, they finally did move off, but it was only when she consented.
Well,
So
again,
it's pretty fun.
what I look for, and what's so interesting is the expression in her eye and the expression in her foal's eyes. The two of them are like, hey, looks interesting. And she's not in a threatening posture, but she is in what I call high alert, high curiosity.
Correct.
And the foal is in the same thing, like, oh, yeah, I see what you're talking about. What is that? And you can see his little nose working. And what's interesting is that another sibling behind her, or tell me about that.
Yes, I think that was her yearling. I'm pretty sure based on just watching them for a few minutes. I think that was her yearling.
Well, and even his posturing was protective of the foal. And you often saw that in family groups where a youngster would be protected oftentimes by another sibling and the mare. And sometimes if the mare has other friends, those other friends, they'd put both their foals in between them and guard them. So there was this whole subtle dynamic of energy and proprioceptive movement that I always was very fascinated about, that it wasn't always the position of where horses are. And that's something, again, that in domestic world, everybody thinks about round pens and chasing and lead ropes and chains on the noses. And horses don't have any of that. It's all about spatial awareness. And when you think, they can feel flies on them. They feel each other's energy. So when a foal is first born, they're about 15 minutes old, 20 minutes old. They got to be able to get up and run. And when they run, they have to know how to stay at their mother's side, because if they start wandering off, they're going to trip other horses. So there was a lot of learning in those first few days for a foal to learn where to nurse and where to position itself next to mom to not get hurt and not hurt other horses. And you'll see the other siblings come in and snake their heads. Like you'll see a yearling or a 2-year-old snake their head and put that foal back at the mare's side, or another mare will turn her head. And I used to think, when I first saw that, I thought, oh gosh, why are those mares being so aggressive to that foal? And then it just was like a light went off. Oh, because that foal is wandering away from its mother's hip. And if that group took off, that foal would get tangled up and get run over. And so this whole
we have seen that happen. Unfortunately, we have seen it happen. Yeah,
where a foal
and the foal died.
Yep.
So it's
critical.
It's
critical where you stay, and that's why that foal is in perfect position behind its mother's shoulder. Mom's in front, and it's got a sibling or protection behind it. And so that foal is very well protected, which tells me right off the bat that that's a very functional social group because of how they're positioning themselves. And that's what I looked for to identify is functional social behaviors because in all social mammals, we look, humans, included, you start looking for what do you do right that keeps the glue of society together so that you can conserve energy and reproduce. I mean, that's nature's directives. And those horses that had strong social networks and good communication, good proprioception, what are those factors? They actually had pretty low reproductive rates. They never had more horses than what they could manage comfortably. You saw very little aggressive behavior. They conserved energy. They spent their energy raising foals and maintaining social bonds. And by, most mammal and social standards in psychology, when you can spend time socializing to reinforce social bonds and meet the needs of, eating and sleeping and water, you're pretty successful.
Okay, so Barbara, can you give us the background of this herd? Is this
Well,
also?
that was the one I said that they were so wild, and the stallion had a very large band to manage by himself. That's a whole nother story. It's a whole nother podcast.
Oh,
Yeah.
you did talk about that when we talked last.
Yes, with our last
Yeah.
podcast, in terms of
So,
having
so this is
another stallion to help manage a
oh my
large
God.
group of horses. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a
But he was by
powerhouse.
himself.
Yep.
Yeah. And he interesting enough, he was a fairly small stallion, much smaller than she is, or his lead mare was. But he wanted to, like I said, he wanted to leave. He wanted to snake his mares away, and she just was too curious, I think, about it. She really wanted to know more,
Mm.
which Marianne just, I think, put it in a nutshell in terms of their expressions here. Looking at us like not really afraid, just curious.
So this is Southwest Oregon, right?
No, this is Utah.
Utah. So well, still, so it's harsh winters there. I mean, again,
Very,
you talk
very
about this,
harsh
Barbara.
winters
I mean,
there.
these do not look like wild animal. They do not look like wild horses. They're so healthy the way I see them. So can you talk about a little bit, both of you, about their diet and how they stay so healthy? What's going on
Well,
here?
that's more Marianne's bailiwick.
Yeah.
I just see them eat.
Right.
She knows what they eat.
Yeah. Well, when I started school in wildlife and was studying wild horses, I was a little bit taken back that you could actually get a degree in wildlife biology without ever taking more than a botany class to know what the animal ate. And I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. So then I realized I have to go get another degree in range management. Well, range management was in the School of Agriculture, and wildlife conservation management was in the School of Arts and Sciences. So they didn't even relate to each other much. So I went off and joined the range plant judging team, and being the only girl in wildlife biology and the only girl in range management, it was a bit of a learning curve for the University of Wyoming of what to do with this single female. But I managed to come out and enjoy and learn a lot. And so, there's a lot of misnomers. So my early work was on dietary overlap of wild horses with other ungulates, cattle, sheep, elk. And that was a misnomer because, some of that data has been, how can I say, not interpreted the way that normal statistics would be interpreted. Because I think it was 4 out of 14 sites where I looked at dietary overlap, 4 out of 14 had some direct overlap with cattle. But that meant that 10 of the 14 really didn't have much overlap with cattle. And yet that was the studies that kind of triggered the removal of wild horses because, rangeland and AUMs, carrying capacities allocated for cattle. And what was interesting is I worked a lot with the ranchers. And for the most part, the ranchers had a system of managing the horses that worked really well for managing horses that maintained some of their, the population probably did influence some of it. But the horses that had stable social bonds, stallions that had been with mares for a long time, they just left them. They didn't do a lot. But the stallions that were off in bachelor bands, they oftentimes would put a Judas mare in a corral, and then those bachelor stallions thought, well, easy picking, and they'd come down, and then they'd get some bachelor youngsters, and then they'd turn into geldings, and now they got ranch horses. So what they were doing in a sort of informal way was culling the herd of adventuresome stallions out of the wild population and making them good ranch horses. So those stallions that had mares and stable populations and families really had the opportunity to continue maintaining that. And you did see foals every year. In good years you did, but a lot of years it was every 2 years, every 3 years. And you didn't see youngsters getting in foal either. The youngest horse when I started my research in the 70s, I think that came in because the BLM had just started, bringing wild horses in. It was a 4-year-old, and there weren't many of them. Most of them were 5, 6.
And that would be highly unusual for what I have seen.
Oh,
A
now,
4-year-old.
yeah,
Yeah.
everything. But that also shows reproductive stress because as
Mhm.
the population gets reduced and you have less selection, stallions don't typically ever breed their own offspring, but you get more stallions, and of course the fertility control and all that, that's a whole nother story. That has really altered. And so, that's what's so thrilling, Barbara, is why we're doing this, is to have this data from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, because I did my research from the 70s till the early 2000s. And then you started doing all your photography, for the last 30 years. Putting that together, that's 50 years of wild horse data. And it's not documented, or if it's documented, it's not available. Let's put it that way.
Or
And
if it's available, it's not paid attention to.
Yes,
yeah, it's not paid
yeah.
attention to. And in a lot of ways, it's very different out there now because things are, and really the point was you saw this, different herds, different behaviors, different cultures. And yet you look for those functional behaviors, it all gets back to strong social bonds, limited aggression, and cooperative raising of foals and a lot of cooperation. So, I mean, even with the stallions, you didn't see, people always think about stallions out there fighting, and that was like the Wild West of stallions. And yeah, they can fight, but I mean, look at, I'm sure you've got pictures in here of all the stallions that are talking to each other and having some conversations and how they communicate
Yes.
with each other. And that's something in domestic world, the poor stallions don't ever get to know their offspring. Their sperm's
Right.
and people don't realize that stallions like to teach and they like to communicate and they like to think.
Yeah, and this is some just the beauty of these animals. It's incredible and makes me, like, again, um they don't look wild. I mean,
Oh,
they
they're
look.
wild.
It's a funny story about that. When I was first on Facebook and first started posting mainly horses from Oregon, um, for many months, I was accused of going out and photographing domestic horses and posting them on Facebook as wild horses. And it was not only once that happened.
And so
And
you
it
mentioned
wasn't the
that
same person. Yeah.
you totally mentioned
So
that, and
I
so
was blown away. I mean, literally, I had no idea because we weren't horse people. I didn't know anything about horses and I didn't know anything about wild horses when we started. So I didn't know they were supposed to be skinny, scrawny, ugly, look half dead. This
none of
was normal to me.
Guys, right? None of your photos
Beautiful wild
have that.
horses.
And Marion, is that your experience? They were
Well,
all.
yeah, there's a couple of stories that were pretty interesting. One was we had to, with another friend of mine, we had, this is a number of years ago, Fish and Wildlife didn't have to protect horses. And down in Cerbot, Arizona, they were removing all the wild horses. And so a friend of mine picked them up and she took them to her
Did you
farm.
say Surbat? Is
Yeah,
that who you're talking about? Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Okay.
And so they removed them. And my friend Robin took them to her farm in, at the time, Carmel Valley, California. But she had pastures and things. And we set everything up. Like all the paddocks were open and they hauled the stallions and they hauled the mares and foals in the back of the van. And the TV crews were there and everybody was there because it's like, oh, wild horses coming in. San Francisco news stations were there. And because we could control it, there was no BLM. There was just us, Robin and me. And so we opened up the van and said, let's just let them figure out where they need to go. And I kid you not, there were 4 stallions. They all got off and they went to each individual paddock and stall on their own. The mares put their nose on the ground, and took the foals, and they went off into a pasture together and watered their foals. And Rob and I, we looked at each other like, wow, they didn't even know where they were, and look how organized they are. And the television station folks were so annoyed. They're like, these aren't wild horses, these are domestic horses. And I'm like,
Right.
these are
Yep.
smart wild horses that are not stressed, that can actually think and smell and communicate what they need to do with no humans intervening.
Right. There you go.
You know, the same kind of thing would happen with Fred Wyatt, who used to run the Palomino Valley. And Fred was sort of a born-again horseman. You know, he came from Spur, Texas, and just a delightful man. And we would always get to talking, and we'd be moving horses around the pens and for people coming to adopt. And one particular time we got to talking so much we couldn't find where the horses. And the way Palomino Valley was set up is they had these chutes, like alleyways. You'd open up a pen and then you'd put a trailer at the end of an alleyway. And we're looking all over. There's no trees. There's not any place to hide. And we're thinking, did one of the horses get out and jump into another pen? I mean, these are tall fences. And where do you think a bunch of wild horses would go if they were just left on their own? Into the horse trailer.
Oh, no way. Oh my God. I never would have guessed that.
All
Never
of
would
them were
have
in the stock horse trailer.
I don't know if that's universal, but
That was
it's
so
a cute
funny,
story.
because what happened was they want to hide, you know, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
one of them probably decided this was a good place to go in, and then all it takes is one. They're pretty social, you know. It's just like the mob behavior. One goes in, then
Right. One goes in, they all go in.
So
like rolling.
And there's like 4 or 5 of these. All of them were just already loaded in the stock trailer, ready to go, because and it made sense because, you know, like if you want to hide from a predator and you don't want to be pushed around, go into a quiet, because they don't think, they think you can't see me because I can't see you, therefore I'm hiding.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was another sort of ha. Well, that was
good.
So Cameron, the picture that you have right here that I can see is a great story. And I'm sure Marianne will have plenty to say about this as well.
And then let's do the split one after this one, Marianne. But how about, let's talk about this one. I like this one as well.
Well, and like I said, it's a great story. This stallion, this red roan stallion, was actually one of our favorites for the many years that we photographed in Wyoming. This is the Rock Springs, Salt Wells Creek. And he was one of the dominant stallions in the herd, real close to the top, I would say, if not the top. And he had a very unique, I think of a unique personality and a unique way of dealing with his band. So people would look at this and not probably have a clue what's going on here. But the Palomino yearling on the far right is the red roan's offspring. The little buckskin in the front, who's throwing his head up, has run over from another band, which was quite a ways away. So he ran in, and, you know, my words, I think he's saying, hey, is it okay for me to play with my buddy here? And this is the stallion greeting him. It went on for a little while, and some of those other pictures are in the book. I just did these two. So this is their, you know, checking each other out. Then when he sort of said, okay, you know, go for it, the two of them went off to play. A third one joined from also the other band across the meadow. The three of them played together for quite a while. Then the lieutenant from the other band ran in, checked them all out, said, okay, I guess everything's all right, ran back to his band. They continued to play quite aggressively with each other. It was funny. It was fun to watch. And then the red roan stallion decided it was time to leave, and he takes off. They're still playing. And all of a sudden the Palomino goes, where's my band? What's going on? Where's Dad? Looks up, sees them quite a ways away, and tears off across the meadow to join them. That is the only thing that broke up that play. So the whole thing was very fun, but that's not the only time we saw this stallion allow another youngster to come in and play, which is kind of unique. We didn't see that a lot. We saw it a couple other times, but not very many times, where it's just, come one, come all, come on in, no problem. but they still had to check each other out.
Well, and you're
Yeah.
bringing up some really good points. I saw a lot of youngsters, not as young as these, more yearling 2-year-olds that would
And
interact.
these are yearlings.
Yearlings, I would say,
Hmm.
yeah. I saw more 2-year-olds that would start horse playing, as they say,
Yes,
going up
yes.
there and biting.
That's more common for
Yeah.
sure.
And the stallions from different bands would keep an eye. You could see them grazing. The mares,
Oh yeah.
what was interesting is the mares rarely paid any attention. It's like because the mares are more interested in the foal at their side. Once it's a 2-year-old, it's like, I don't care. Just dad, keep him out of trouble. I'm not responsible for him anymore. Almost. They just kind of almost ignored them unless the 2-year-old would come bothering the mare. But the 2-year-olds that had nothing to do would start playing. And I remember watching one stallion who was grazing. I watched him do an eye glance at the two, and I thought they're getting pretty rough out there. And all of a sudden, he decided they were getting too rough, and he just laid out after the two of them, and like, you just knock that off. And he,
And we have seen exactly the same thing you're describing. Yep.
like,
And it was 2-year-olds. Yep.
2-year-olds, like, it's fine to practice your rearing and your biting, but when you start getting a little too rough, that's not okay.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
where
Yeah, we saw that too. I have seen at least once where a mare got mad at the 2-year-olds because they were too close to her foal.
ah,
And boy, she was ticked off. Very,
it's actually,
very ticked
don't
off.
we have one
But
in the,
generally they ignore, but you're right. Generally they just ignore it. So here's the stallion grazing behind, paying no attention. The mare is interrupting the play because her little baby, and he was a fairly small foal, was getting too close. And they were, of course, young stallions don't pay attention to anything
no.
except each other. So yeah.
Well, and I think there's
So
some
then
pictures in the book like that where the mayor is saying, okay, you guys are,
I
she's,
think that might be in the book. I can't remember for sure.
yeah.
Where her ears are real pinned and the two youngsters are rearing up and the little foals in front.
Yeah, I love the one,
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe
I
it's
think it's
group where the mayor it's one of the chapter photos where the mayor is striking. As the stallion's coming up and going, "Hey, babe," and she's like, no."
Yep. There's a real
There's,
story behind that one too.
all
do
right.
you
Of
have that one?
course.
Can you send that one?
I gotta get two questions in.
It's not in here.
Oh, okay.
Uh-uh.
I
It's
gotta get
not
two
in
questions
here.
in there because there are
Okay.
a couple of things that you guys are really got some rich conversation. But two questions. What's the average size of a band in general, and then when does a horse leave a band?
Oh,
Boy.
okay. Well, I will tell you what I've seen,
Okay.
which I think might actually differ from Marianne's research because we're talking about many intervening years and lots of human interference. I would say probably the average band is something like 6 or 7 horses, maybe a stallion, maybe 2 stallions with, several mares and foals. Generally speaking, we've seen young stallions get kicked out of their band at around 2 years old. If it's older than that, they tend to become big problems because they want to breed. And the image that Marianne was just talking about the mare striking, that was a 3-year-old who was still in the band, and the band stallion was under so much pressure from other bachelor stallions, he was unable to get that errant 3-year-old out of there, and he really really needed to be out of there for a whole bunch of reasons. They become very disruptive. So if a 3-year-old is still in the band, there's usually a lot of chaos in the band. And we have seen stallions run their 2-year-olds off, 2 years plus off. Sometimes it doesn't stick. They just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. So that's my experience in the field. Does that differ from what you saw 30 years ago, Marianne?
Things were different, and I'd say that there was seasonal movement. The average was probably a stallion, a mare, and 2 offspring. There was a lot of individual family bands, and then
Mm-hmm.
they would come together in the spring, and you'd see these larger groups on the meadows and desert, especially in Arizona or in Utah and Wyoming. And of course, the priors are a little different, but they would be larger groups in the summer and spring, and then as forage got a little bit scarce, you'd see them break off into smaller groups. The bachelor bands were all over the place. Sometimes you'd see 2 or 3 stallions, and it was like, who's around that I can buddy up with? You rarely saw any
Yes.
individuals.
And they're fluid.
Yeah, they come and go.
Stallions come,
Yeah.
exactly. They come and they
But,
go. And
and you've seen this too. What was really fascinating is when you'd see a young mare, either she lost her herd
yes,
or she got wandering and got kicked out, and then all of a sudden she's with all the bachelors, and they're not
yes,
breeding her. She's like a tomboy. She's one of their pals, and they tended to associate by, I'd say, uh, a group of whoever would be my friend at that age. And because a lot of times the older bachelor stallions would not let the younger ones in. And so they'd have to form their own kind of juvenile groups if they got kicked out. But with the mares, it was very different because typically a mare never got kicked out of the natal band unless she'd done something wrong or wandered off or was a troublemaker. And most of the time they were not. They had to get recruited by a young, a stallion that would have to take them. And sometimes they'd go wandering off, and you would even see, I think you have some pictures like that where the stallion and the mare just don't want that mare associating with another stallion, like they're protecting her from him.
I have seen that many times.
And they're
Mhm.
like, you're too young. He's not going to be a good one, you know? And other times you'd see them, they didn't, and the boys too, they had no interest in leaving. It's comfy here. I got, family and friends. Why do I want to run off and be a wild stallion? So sometimes they're too,
Right. They don't, for whatever reason, they don't want to leave, which is kind of interesting because I think many times they would prefer to go off and join a bachelor band and be rowdy and play. And so it's not common, but there's been a few times they just haven't wanted to leave. And sometimes when they leave, they take a mare too. That's the other thing.
yeah,
They'll take a mare or two with them because they're old enough to do that
yeah.
and
They're
big
like,
enough.
let's run away.
I want to
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
move on.
I
Move
want to
on.
I want to clarify something Marianne said because um, when I'm talking about a band, I'm talking about a mama, a papa, babies. Um, so the bands definitely join up together in the spring, sometimes into very large, what I would call a herd or a semi, part of a herd, sub herd, whatever. Sometimes 130 horses together. And then later on in the summertime, in the fall, they will break up into individual bands again. So I think that what we've seen when the times that we've been able to do, sometimes we're in the same place spring, summer, and fall, so we see the same bands. The bands have stayed rather stable during those 3 seasons, but the herd has fluctuated. So the characteristics of the herd, bands tend to come and go. Sometimes some of them are much less social than others, and they want to be off by themselves after foaling is over. So there are definitely seasonal changes. You'll see completely different situation in the spring than you would say in the fall. And I've never been there in the wintertime because it's always very difficult to get to these places in the wintertime. So I couldn't tell you what's happening in the wintertime.
Well, and and I think some of their behavior changes based on habitat and forage too, because I remember
Sure. And
through
water,
and water
water,
in
water's a big deal.
Eastern Oregon, and I had a friend that managed down in the Kyger Plateau, and we thought that there must have been coyotes or wolves or something. You could see in a helicopter a flyover where there were circles around juniper trees. And so the oddest thing is there was a whole group of horses that were found, and that this was not common. Most of them were down lower, but they had gone up in the juniper area in the snow, and they were eating juniper berries, browsing juniper berries.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and we were like, what? If we hadn't
Huh.
seen it, it'd be like, what? And I was doing another range study in Northern California, Northeastern California. And again, if I hadn't seen horse manure on the rocks, I was literally climbing up, like rock climbing. Only a mountain goat could get up that because the BLM said, well,
You
that's
thought.
not a horse area. There's no horses up there. There's no horses up there. And I'm like, okay. So I'm climbing up there doing, looking at deer scat and all kinds of things. Well, there was horse manure up there. So there were some horses
Wow.
up there for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, that was just fascinating. And again, the behavior was more individually than what I had, I guess, thought. Like I went into it thinking, oh, I'm going to make some broad sweeping judgments about horses and horse behavior. What I came away with is that it's very dependent on the behavior and the temperament, the personality of the individual horses and their learning. And what I could come away with was factors of how do they communicate. They all make eye contact. They all like social.
Correct.
I think we should show that. Social greeting across the board was pretty much the same, even though the culture could be a little different. How they have their foals and how they interact and form social bonds, pretty much the same. But
how they parent, however, is quite different.
Totally different. Yes, some mares really were great and loved the foals, and others would just wander off and leave their foals, like leaving them.
But stallions are the same way. They're very different in terms of how they approach discipline, for lack of a better word. Very, very different. That surprised me as well.
But
maybe we can show some pictures.
But I have to say, but all stallions are involved with the raising of the foal.
Every single one of them. Never seen one that wasn't.
There have been some that have come and go. I've seen some come and go, but it's been more because the mare ran them off than, and the curiosity was there to be there, but the mare was like, you're having no part of them. So
I'm sure that maybe some of them would have wanted to do that. I don't know. You can tell sometimes when the mare is not enthusiastic about their stallion, but I can't say that I have ever seen a stallion. He might have a different way of approaching his family, but I don't think I've ever seen a stallion in a band that I've watched year after year, and I guess that's the qualifier, who has not been engaged in his family and with his foals, just in different ways.
And what's so interesting, and you've seen this too, is where a foal might, maybe its mom died giving birth to another colt, or, it gets lost, but there'll be a youngster and a bachelor group will pick up the youngster and protect it. And
there's a great image in here.
Okay.
How interesting you would say that.
Let's get that one out. That's the end of part 1 for this interview with Barbara and Marianne. Please stay tuned. Next week I'll have part 2. It's such a fascinating topic, and it's so important if any interest in horses to really look at the dynamics in a wild herd. And these two they know their stuff. Thank you for joining this episode on the Centaur Podcast. I'm Cameron Adibi again, and please check out my website to learn more about what I do at CameronAdibi.com. That's CameronAdibi.com. I hope you enjoyed this discussion and gained some valuable insights. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in next time for more engaging conversations. Until then, take care.